Good morning, everyone. I'm Barclay Knapp. I'm very pleased to be with you today. First of all, I'd like to thank the ITU for inviting me to speak. As you can see by the gray hairs, I've had a long career in technology and especially in telecommunications. And I always remember that the International Telecommunications Union has been a true force for good in the world. We're very happy that they've also taken up the AI mantle. And so thank you very much for having me today. I'm going to introduce to you two things today. One you've probably heard a little bit about, which is digital finance and the coming tsunami in digital finance. And one you haven't probably heard much about, which is my company called DeepGreenX. We at DeepGreenX believe that we will become one of these leaders in this terrific new opportunity we call digital finance. So without further ado, DeepGreenX is all about using AI, the blockchain, tokenization, and modern digital financial tools to partner with large-scale enterprises, regions, countries, multi-country enterprises to help them and guide them to new ways to raise capital, to form capital, number one, and then create value. And that's really ultimately what finance is about. Capital should create value, not only for companies, but for communities and for individuals. So at the core, what we really are witnessing is the transformation through AI and blockchain and tokenization of traditional finance to a new form of finance that is both inclusive, democratic, more global, and more open. And we're very pleased to be leading that revolution, we think. So what is it exactly we do? Well, think about any sort of investment bank or traditional financing platform. The companies that are involved in traditional finance go out and seek customers with assets. They work with them to capitalize those assets and develop new sources of capital. And then they bring those sources to market and monetize them. We do this as well, but only in the digital framework. And importantly, using the principles of AI and blockchain and tokenization. We call ourselves a factory because that's what we are. In the new digital age, what used to take humans months or even years sometimes, we now can reproduce it very quickly. And very significantly, Deep Green is all about being able to take virtually any kind of asset category, whether it's nature, whether it's data, or whether it's just classical, industrial equipment, trading systems, et cetera, put them through our machine and emerge out the other end with new kinds of financial instruments. An important principle for us is that it be investment grade. And I'll have a little bit more to say about this in a minute, but in essence, the current financial system is not broken. And what we do in terms of evaluating projects, doing due diligence, establishing who owns what, is very, very important. Sometimes it has been lacking in certainly the crypto world and in the digital financial world. We're bringing that ethos into the modern age, and more significantly using artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is particularly adept at seeing through anomalies in things like where did assets come from, or who is sponsoring this. And so the modern age, we use AI, in essence, to enhance the protection of our assets for the future. I want to also say that this has been a very fragmented industry so far. What we aim is for a global reach. And in fact, we see now that not only are there smaller projects are turning into bigger projects, but regions, nations, and even supranational kinds of entities are embracing tokenization as the new modern form of currency for all trade. So what is this digital finance tsunami that I'm talking about? Well, if you think about it, if you think of all the world's assets, and you think of, from everything from houses to factories to supply blockchains to everything in the modern age. All of that can actually be put in some form or fashion on the blockchain. A digital financial instrument or a token can be created from it, and then it can be exchanged, traded, and monetized just like we would a stock certificate or just like we would an old-fashioned bond certificate. The key, though, is there's $900 trillion worth of assets that are ripe for tokenization and essentially can be refinanced to create capital for new sources of capital to do good in the world, effectively. The other part of what the digital financial industry brings is not only do we create capital, but we smooth transactions. If you think of a token as essentially a modern form of currency, you can also think of a token as almost like a bill or a certificate. So you attach a token, say, to a shipment of soybeans. The token represents a ton of soybeans that are being shipped from point A to point B, and you can track that shipment online via the blockchain and much more reliably than using pieces of paper and stamps and the old-fashioned ways of doing it. So fundamentally, we're transforming not only the ability to raise capital, but then to trade these assets worldwide, trade everything from commodities to steel to AI and computing, which I'll get to in a minute. So not only are we allowing the traditional industries to grow and prosper, but we're actually going to be enabling the newer emerging industries like AI, like data centers, like computing centers, like green energy, which is vitally important for us. So how does this actually work? Well, I put up some case studies here. The first one concerns the province of Maluku in Indonesia. This is a very large province. It covers 71 million hectares of area. It's beautiful. They used to be called the Spice Islands. It's everything that one can imagine in a beautiful tropical paradise. The islands, though, want to develop themselves. And historically, a place like Maluku really didn't have access to private capital. What we're able to do now with tokenization, oh, and by the way, we absolutely want to preserve this beautiful nature and this beautiful area for all of humanity. So what we were able to do is we secured a concession by the province of Maluku to, number one, protect the environment, the green, the forest, the biosystems, and everything else. So the number one objective is protection, number one. But number two, then things like reforestation, management, enhancement of the green assets. That actually turns out to be worth money. And so the first step, and you've probably heard of things like carbon certificates or carbon credits, the first step is basically to use the capital that can be generated by the nature-based assets to sort of kickstart the capital development for this chain of islands. The second piece is the development piece. So if you want to build new roads, you want to build new ports, you want to build new fishing facilities, you want to build new airports, it's better to start them out on a tokenization path to raise the capital. Why? Because we can do it in months, not years. In fact, we're going to be launching our first set of tokens in Maluku in the next several weeks, after only concluding these arrangements a couple of months ago. So from rights to capital in months for a region that absolutely we want to preserve for all of us for the future, but wants to take what it has and be able to develop it for the future as well. And this pattern can be repeated over and over. And what we're seeking to do as Deep Green is to find these areas and have those areas come to us that can use their nature-based resources and their real-world assets to develop capital that they otherwise may never get with traditional means. Okay, so flipping gears a little bit. We're at an AI conference. One of the big issues in AI is there's just not enough power, right? It's like an old Star Trek show. Give me more power. Number one. Number two, AI has been, I use the term blockaded. there's a lot of international hand-wringing about the regulation of AI, which is the subject of this conference. And finally, there's just not enough computing power. So you have scarcity of energy, you have scarcity of computing power, and then you have scarcity of access. Digital finance can start to cure that. And one of the next tokens that we're doing is a more generalized token where users or owners of green energy, of data centers, of computing centers, can essentially convert their assets into tokens and now essentially trade them worldwide. With the telecommunications interoperability that we have, it's a way for communities that don't have access necessarily to AI resources or heavy-duty computing or data centers to essentially, from Poland, let's say, buy computing resources in Texas. Why? Because tokenization levels the field. It's cross-border, it's cross-currency, and allows assets to be shared among a larger population. Now, this doesn't mean we're going around any regulations or strictly, in the regulatory framework, we're adhering to all of those kinds of things. But using a common platform and a common means of exchange and the sort of verification capabilities of tokenization allows scarce resources to be shared on a much wider basis for good. And I think this whole conference is about how we turn this amazing thing called AI into something that's going to be good. Our job is to turn that AI into something that can be used around the world. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about trade, because we talked about capital. If you think about every time you use your credit card, every time any transaction occurs in the world where somebody pays something else for money, we call that essentially trade. Sometimes it's called gross trading value. The absolute flow of currency around the world that's involved in that kind of commerce is enormous. And as I pointed out on the other slide, if you add up all those transactions, it equals it's over 1 quadrillion US dollars, which is a number that's like out of sight. It's probably too hard to contemplate. But again, that occurs in an environment that is really, really sticky. If you think about all the cross-border trade issues and all the political environments and all of the intricacies of, say, getting a fish from a fisherman's catch in Maluku to a seafood market in Hong Kong, we can change those kinds of systems from being dependent on paper and the odd computer and the odd online resource to an integrated system. But since it's cross-border and cross-country, we also need a sort of stabilizing currency for all of that. And that's where our concept of the universal super stablecoin comes in. It's a mouthful. But essentially, a stablecoin is a representation right now of a currency. The two most famous ones are denominated in US dollars and have now started to emerge as wonderful new tools for the new economy. What we're proposing to do is to link those globally, creating more effective multi-currency stablecoins that allow goods in Vietnam to be traded with China, or goods from Vietnam to be traded with Japan, goods from Malaysia to be traded with Australia, goods from Argentina to be traded with France, in a much more efficient and reliable mechanic that has ever been done before. Again, this is democratizing trade and finance, we believe. It's creating more, in every step of the way, it creates more sustainability, because by definition, if you can do things faster, you're going to burn less fuel doing it. You're going to waste fewer resources doing it. So we're getting at sustainability directly by protecting forests in Maluku, and then indirectly by essentially smoothing these trade routes, smoothing the transactions, creating capital for investment in things like green energy for data centers. Digital finance and sustainability go hand in hand. Now, a little bit about what I was saying before. When we're not crypto, digital finance is decidedly what we call investment grade. Why? Because, hey, we all understand a little bit maybe, or maybe a lot about the crypto industry. And like a lot of new technologies, it sort of sprung up. But I liken it to the old American Wild West. There were lots of settlers, lots of bad guys, and not too many sheriffs around. We've taken the components of crypto, namely the blockchain, but as I said, put the AI front end on it, plus traditional thinking and methodologies to create much more reliable confidence and trust. As we say, we're not just building tokens, we're building confidence, trust, and reality, backed by real assets, backed by real data, backed by real things like forests. That's sort of point number one. Point number two is, if we're going to transform all of our transactions around the world, a quadrillion's worth of transactions, you better be able to do it faster. Our blockchain industry, actually, is getting a little bit antiquated. The old rules about processing power are taking hold in the blockchain as well. And so bringing a new blockchain technology into the fore is very important. Why? Because if you're going to increase something by 1,000 times in terms of volume, you need to increase your ability to process it by 1,000 times. So not only are we upgrading the ethos that started in the crypto business and replacing it with investment grade, we're upgrading the transaction capability to make it much faster and with tremendously more throughput. And finally, once you have the next generation of blockchain, it becomes much easier to defend against the bad guys. Quantum security is going to be a necessity, and only with the new forms of technology can you get there. And DeepGreenX is bringing that technology forward. So, I don't know when, but I know it's coming. We've all seen revolutions in the past. As I said, my gray hairs, I've seen revolutions over many years. This is truly something that will happen over time. It is accelerating, because anything you can do to create better, faster, and essentially less expensive capital for humanity, number one, and then equality, more sort of international ability, the faster things will scale. By definition, this is international. This is why it's here. The other thing that's important is that you don't have to force sustainability. You don't have to, subsidies are great, but you do not have to. Because when you create a machine that's able to get capital to projects, it becomes common sense to put in green generation facilities because they're the fastest to develop. It makes sense to collapse trading systems to the fewest possible pieces. So what we're about is sustainability really at bottom needs to be profitable to be truly sustainable. You can subsidize it, you can create, incentives and everything else. But what the world needs is for us humans to actually embrace it in our everyday lives, because it's not only the right thing to do, but it's the economic thing to do. And digital finance is essentially creating that for us. And then finally, we are, as I have pointed out, AI does so many things for us along our value chain, from securing trust to weeding out the bad guys to protecting our financial instruments from also the bad guys. But more importantly, this whole digital financial world can play a leveling influence between the haves and the want-to-haves, let's say. And I firmly believe that the spread of technology is something that is good for humanity and something we believe very strongly at Deep Green. We have a saying, when people talk about edge computing or edge this or edge that, The ultimate edge is the human. We need to embrace technology that improves our lives, not for some other goals or some economic goals. So we keep in the forefront always that what we do needs to be creating value, sustaining our planet, and doing good for all individuals. So this is truly AI for good, in our opinion. Thank you very much.